All right, 508, here we are into part 3 where we're talking about the findings from the National Reading Panel regarding vocabulary instruction. So when they talk about this direct and explicit instruction of vocabulary and of word knowledge, they talk about using vocabulary strategies before, during, and after reading. So before reading, having students preview words or giving some pre-instruction. You probably know this as front-loading of words. During reading activities, you have opportunities for students to learn words incidentally while they read or they listen. You can give direct and explicit instruction on vocabulary, right? The vocabulary builds during their reading. And then we know that more words are learned from the reading than from listening to others speak or using them themselves. They learn through this repeated exposure to words and then doing after reading activities, substituting or define using easy words, building connections for students between words and concepts, words and other words, and then combining these approaches, the research shows, is probably the best way for students to learn words. So one of the things that the report of the National Reading Panel also recommends is choosing text for students by keeping the goal of building vocabulary in mind, right? So when we're talking about how rich a text is, so how many different types of words, or the complexity of the words, the complexity and the variety of the words within that text, giving students multiple exposures to words used in different types of text, so not necessarily just narrative, but having students also read expository, exposing students to poetry, exposing students to graphic text, exposing them to digital text. So all of this enhances and enriches vocabulary knowledge and vocabulary learning, making sure that text is at students' independent and instructional levels. So teaching vocabulary and using word learning strategies during content area instruction as well. So all of these are findings and recommendations in the report of the National Reading Panel. So there's also research that addresses kind of how many words teachers could teach a day to close that gap. So we've talked about how, students really learn the most words through reading, but we know that students can also learn words through direct and explicit instruction in the classroom. So in first and second grade, kids need to learn about 800 or more words a year. So that's about 2 words per day. So remember, we can teach these words. They're also going to pick up some of them incidentally. But we can teach kids these words. And if you think about first and second grade, the words that you're going to teach them 2 a day isn't that unreasonable, because those words are fairly simple words that you will probably repeat quite a bit. So they'll have lots and lots of exposure. We're not talking about teaching them 2 unique words for science vocabulary per day. Kids need to learn about 2,000 to 3,000 new words each year then from grades 3 and above. So that's about, 6 to 8. So you can instruct some of those, but to really kind of stay on track and not have a big gap in their vocabulary, if you think about combining explicit instruction and incidental word learning opportunities, that's about how many new words they need in order not to have this big gap in their vocabulary. And again, remember, students that were behind in first grade, they need a more intense focus on word learning. So they may need more explicit instruction, or you may need to be more selective and focused on providing opportunities for incidental word learning. And then the research has shown that, most average kids, or typically developing kids, need to encounter a word about 12 times before they know it well enough to really know that word for it to improve their comprehension. So that's when we talk about multiple and repeated exposure, that's quite a bit of exposure to those words. So it's something to keep in mind when you're developing those lists, or you're even just coming across a word, pointing it out to kids that it's an important word. Then kind of we need to make sure that that's a word that they're going to hear again. So kind of on that note, talking about just like the text matters, right? The words that you choose to instruct on also matter. So take a look at this particular sentence. Jose avoided playing the ukulele. So which word might you choose to pre-teach to your students? Take a look at that sentence and in your mind, select the word. So the best word, according to the research, to choose is avoided. Right? So Jose avoided playing the ukulele. So why avoided? Well, verbs tend to be where the action is. If you look at, and many of you, if you're in teaching right now in elementary, middle, or high schools, or even in community college, you know that general academic vocabulary is a very hot topic these days. It's all over the Common Core as well. So all of those words on the general academic word list tend to be verbs, right? So you would teach avoid, avoided, avoids, so all the derivations of the word avoid. Kids are likely to see that word avoid over and over again in grade level text. They're likely to see it well, on the FCAP, but that's a particular standardized test. They're likely to see it on standardized tests. They're likely to see it in across multiple content areas. So the word avoid, they're likely to encounter in a social studies text, in narrative text, in expository text, in language arts, and in science and social studies, in math. They're likely to hear teachers use that word. That is a high leverage word, right? We're going to call these the tier 2 words, and I'm going to talk about that in a second if you're not familiar with it. But why not ukulele? So I think that ukulele is likely a word that if the story, let's say this is from a story, right? So in like a 3rd grade reader, the story is about ukulele, or they mention ukulele even just one or a couple of times. This is the type of word that is likely identified by the reader as a word to provide instruction on. And when I mean the reader, I mean the book, right? So the teacher's guide. The teacher's guide is likely to select a word like ukulele as a word that you should provide as a vocabulary word for that week. We would say don't teach that, and the research would suggest don't teach ukulele. Just tell them what ukulele means, show them the picture, and move on. Right? They're rarely going to come across that word again. And that word is rarely going to be used in stories or in conversation or in any content area information that they're likely to encounter. So it's not that you avoid the word, right? You tell them what it means, but you tell them, you show them, and you move on. When you're talking about the words that you're selecting for instruction, that you're going to give students lots of practice with over the course of the week, and you're going to give them those multiple exposures to, a word like avoid is a lot more bang for your buck. So, you can't pre-teach every hard word, so you need to make sure that you're choosing those words carefully. You want to look at words that are going to be high leverage, likely to be seen again. They have some kind of usefulness. It could be words that are critical to the meaning of the story, but again, a lot of times you can just tell them the word, show them the word, and kind of move on. If it's not a high frequency word, but it's still critical to the story. I remember there's an open court story about a Russian tea kettle, or Hungarian tea kettle, and it's called a samovar. I think it's like in the 5th grade open court series. I would not spend all week teaching the kids what a samovar is. I would show them the word, show them a picture of a samovar, and through the course of reading the story, they're going to pick up on what a samovar is. So why would I want to waste instructional minutes teaching them what this is? This is like a one and done. This is it. This is the word. Let's move on. I can select words that are a lot more useful to use my instructional time on. You also might want to think about some words that you think are important but not defined in the context of the story. So like samovar, they would pick up through the context of the story, but there may be words that you feel are important for kids or useful words that they're not going to pick up incidentally or on their own as they read. So the other thing you could pre-teach too is figurative speech and idiomatic expressions, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. A good kind of pre-teaching strategy is this stages of word knowledge strategy. So you would select words for students, vocabulary words. So this would be an example like for you guys. I could pick the terms phonological awareness, phonics, and phonemic awareness. And then you would actually go through and you would rate your familiarity with the word. So, phonics. I know this word well, I can explain it, and I can use it correctly. But phonological awareness, you say, I know something about it. I can relate it to something familiar. So you may rate that differently. So this, for you as the teacher, gives you an idea, and for the students, how well they know the words that they're going to encounter in the text. So it's a neat strategy for kind of a pre-reading activity. So I talked a few minutes ago about tiers of words, right? So in this idea of selecting words, we sometimes think about the tiers. And so this is Beck and McEwen's work that's been around for quite a bit. Lots of people are familiar with it. And basically what they did is they took vocabulary and they thought about vocabulary in 3 different ways. And so you've got tier 1, which is your basic vocabulary. These are generally words that are part of a good oral vocabulary, but they're basic. Happy, talk, cold, park, pool, those types of words. They're very important words, and so especially for English language learners and very young learners, these are very important words. But these are words that kids generally know, and they're part of their oral vocabulary. So when you're thinking about the words that you would select for instruction, you generally don't select words that you might categorize as what we call tier 1. And I'm going to jump, and then we've got tier 3. So tier 3 is generally subject or content specific vocabulary. They're generally low frequency words. They're really specific to topics or particular domains. So like in science, the word like isotope would be part of a unit. Words that are related to a particular content area. So for these, you provide instruction on them when the need arises. So if you were teaching, let's say, a unit on isotope, I don't even know what that's related to. Isotopes, obviously I didn't learn very well. Chemistry, right? So if you were doing that particular unit in chemistry, you are going to teach isotope during that unit, but you're not necessarily going to be teaching that any other time, or if it's in another piece of text, it's not necessarily the word I would choose for instruction. And even in that content area, these words will also be learned somewhat incidentally. So you tell the students what these words mean. You give them that instruction when the need arises, and then as they learn the content, they're going to learn the word isotope. But having them spend time just studying isotope as a word isn't necessarily going to build their concept knowledge, or isn't going to necessarily impact their vocabulary overall. So we focus on this tier 2. So a lot of times when we're talking about tier 2 words, they are the words that help them use the tier 3 words. So these are tier 2 are the academic words. They're high frequency. Examples: avoid, fortunate, industrious. They play a large role in communicating across a variety of domains. So when we talk about the language of the disciplines, well, the disciplines all have their tier 3 words. So if you're a mathematician, you have all these math words that you use, and if you're a scientist, you have all these science words that you use, and if you're a an English major, you have all these English words that you use. But then the way that you communicate academically, or the way that you participate in these these discourse communities outside of just the subject matter vocabulary is through using the words academically, right? So I'm actually going to stop us here. I'm going to run out. So I will pick up this conversation in the next one.